So we'll have a series of task force member updates, beginning with Retta de Mesa from the California Energy Commission. We'll then turn it over to Janet Gagnon from Blue Lake Rancheria. We'll have a space for other invited tribal task force members to provide an update if they choose. We'll adjourn temporarily for a break and then come back for Holly Wire from the California Coastal Commission and Tyrone Connor from the U.S. Coast Guard. So we'll start with Retta. Over to you.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We can hear you well. And I'll just add, before Retta, I turn it over, I'll remind folks that we'll have the task force discussion after these updates here. So I know Retta is going to give great information. So we'll save our questions for after that. And for the public input opportunity is at the end. All right, now Retta, really over to you.
Perfect. Thank you. Next slide, please. Oh, one more maybe. There we go. So good morning. I'm Retta de Mesa with the California Energy Commission, and I'm going to be providing an update on Assembly Bill 525 this morning. Assembly Bill 525 requires the Energy Commission to develop a strategic plan for offshore wind energy developments installed off the California coast in federal waters. Next slide, please. So before I jump into AB 525, I'll take a brief moment to provide context around one of the drivers for the state's focus on offshore wind development, which is the 100% Clean Energy Act of 2018, also known as Senate Bill 100 or SB 100. Senate Bill 100 is a pillar of the state's climate policy. It updated the state's renewables portfolio standard to ensure that at least 60% of the state's electricity comes from eligible renewable energy resources by 2030, and that by 2045, all retail electricity sold in California, as well as 100% of the electricity procured to serve state agencies, come from eligible, renewable, and zero carbon energy resources. SB 100 also requires the Energy Commission, the California Air Resources Board, and the Public Utilities Commission to prepare a joint report every 4 years that assesses the 2045 policy. The first of these reports was issued in 2021 and found that California is going to need a significant build out of clean energy generation over the next 25 years to meet this policy. Portfolio modeling completed for the joint agency report covered a range of scenarios and technologies. And in the core scenario, the modeling used a built-in assumption that up to 10 gigawatts of offshore wind is available. And the model selected all 10 gigawatts in the 2045 portfolio, as you can see in the table on the right there. Next slide, please. Building on the 2021 Joint Agency SB 100 report and years of work by state agencies evaluating the potential for offshore wind energy in federal waters off the coast of California, including through participation in this task force, the California legislature passed and Governor Newsom signed AB 525 into law in September of 2021, which took effect on January 1st of this year. AB 525 requires the CEC to develop a strategic plan for wind energy developments installed off the California coast in federal waters in coordination with a number of other local, state, and federal partners and with input from stakeholders. The strategic plan is due by June 30, 2023, and is required to address at a minimum identification of sea space, economic and workforce development and identification of port space and infrastructure, transmission planning, permitting, potential impacts on coastal resources, fisheries, Native American and Indigenous peoples, and national defense, as well as recommendations on strategies for addressing those potential impacts. In developing the strategic plan, AB 525 also requires the CEC to meet some interim requirements. These include by June 1st of this year, the CEC was to evaluate and quantify the maximum feasible capacity of offshore wind to achieve reliability, ratepayer, employment, and decarbonization benefits, and to establish megawatt planning goals for 2030 and 2045. By December 31st of this year, there are 2 requirements the CEC must complete. The first is a preliminary economic assessment of the benefits of offshore wind as they relate to seaport investments and workforce development needs and standards. And the second is to develop a permitting roadmap that describes the timeframes and milestones for a coordinated, comprehensive, and efficient permitting process for offshore wind energy facilities and associated electricity and transmission infrastructure. On May 6th, CEC staff published a draft report for public comment to meet the June 1st requirement of evaluating the maximum feasible capacity and establishing offshore wind planning goals for 2030 and 2045. The CEC team then held a public workshop on the draft report on May 18th. Some high-level findings in the draft report. CEC staff included a technical potential of 21.8 gigawatts of offshore wind off the coast of California in federal waters. It's important to note that the technical potential included in the report does not represent maximum feasible capacity as required in the legislation. At the CEC, we recognize that additional work that will be completed as part of developing the strategic plan to meet the requirements in AB 525, particularly the sea space assessment, will be a key input to the evaluation of maximum feasible capacity. So the 21.8 gigawatts of technical potential was included in the draft report as a reference point and is based on existing analytical studies and best available information at the time. For planning purposes, the draft report also included recommendations for preliminary planning goals of 3 gigawatts by 2030 and included a range of 10 gigawatts to 15 gigawatts by 2045. We're still in the process of reviewing the public comments we received on the draft report, including verbal comments that were provided at the May 18th workshop. And as the Chair Hochschild mentioned, we're planning on holding a second workshop, which will be later this month. The date is still being confirmed, but once it is, we'll issue a public notice with additional workshop details. And then just looking ahead, while we've been working on the draft report, we've also been working on other AB 525 requirements, and we'll continue to do so with a focus on the next set of interim requirements, the preliminary economic assessment and permitting roadmap, which, as I mentioned, are due at the end of this year, as well as the work necessary to begin identifying suitable sea space. The CEC will continue to collaborate with our partner state agencies and seek input from federal, state, and local agencies, as well as tribes and other stakeholders as we work to meet all the requirements of AB 525. Next slide, please. So I realized that was a quick update. I'd be happy to answer questions during the discussion portion of the agenda a little later this morning. I also have my contact information here for anyone that would like to reach out with questions or to discuss AB 525 in more detail. With that, I will hand it back to Jen.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Greta, for that presentation on AB 525.